Is this on?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you, Tom. Hey, Sophie.
Hi, Councilman.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening. Now, do people?
Councilwoman Ressinetti, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Oh, okay. So Janine put through the new call. That how it goes. Okay. 40 seconds. "30 seconds and live." We're broadcasting, right?
Oh, God.
Yes, right here. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City Council of the City of Binghamton Business Meeting Agenda, Wednesday, May 18th, 2022 at 16 p.m. The meeting is called to order and duly convened. Please stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands,
Under
One
God,
nation,
God,
indivisible,
visible,
with
with
liberty
liberty,
and justice for all.
For anyone live streaming or watching at home, if you go to binghamton-ny.gov/community/calendar-month-view, select May 18th, click City Council Business Meeting, and you'll be provided with an electronic copy of this evening's agenda. The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Clerk.
Yes. Councilwoman Ressinetti,
Present?
Councilwoman Riley,
Present.
Councilwoman Friedman,
Present.
Councilman Burns,
Present.
Councilman Scanlon,
Present.
and President Strawn is absent, and President Pro Tem Scaringi.
Present.
That's 6 here, 1 absent. Strawn.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Ressinetti for the purposes of a motion.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry about that.
That's okay, Councilwoman.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'd like
course.
to make a motion to approve the minutes from the May 4th, 2022 business meeting.
Does the chair hear a second? Does
Second.
the chair? Motion by Councilwoman Ressinetti, seconded by Councilman Scanlon. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The chair
Aye.
recognizes it unanimously passes. We'll move on to reports from committees, and as chair of the Municipal and Public Affairs Committee, the standing committee members, Councilwoman Ressinetti, Councilwoman Riley, and myself, as well as Councilman Burns and other colleagues, had a meeting of the MPAA Committee on Friday, May 13th. We discussed the beginning of code issues around the categories of quality of life, code, and procedure. Later on in this meeting, at a later point in the agenda, we will check for availability for meeting number 2. That being said, there are no approval of appointments. General reminder to council colleagues, the CDAC Council at Large position is currently still vacant. Please submit any names and respective CVs for consideration at your earliest opportunity. That being said, at this time, to be read into the record, a public hearing needs to be set for considering code reform. The City of Binghamton will hold a public hearing regarding RL 22-140 entitled "The Local Law Amending the City Code Regarding Property and Building Nuisance Reform." This public hearing will take place during the next regular City Council business meeting at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, June 8th, 2022, virtually via Zoom. I'd ask Mr. Clerk to please submit this information formally into the record for the purposes of setting a public meeting. Residents who wish to submit comments may do so electronically by emailing their comments prior to 1 p.m. on the day of the meeting to clerk@cityofbinghamton.com or virtually via Zoom during the meeting. For any questions, please contact the City Clerk's office at 607-772-7005. At this point, we'll move forward with public comment. Residents wishing to submit public comment may do so electronically by emailing their comments prior to 1 p.m. on the day of a meeting to clerk@cityofbinghamton.com or virtually via Zoom during the meeting. During public comment, you will have 5 minutes to speak. The clerk will provide you with a verbal 1-minute warning. Mr. Clerk, have any written communications been submitted for this portion?
There are no written communications.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Seeing none, I will pass it on to the city clerk to move through the virtual portion if there are any attendees. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Yes, if any of the Zoom attendees would like to participate in public comment this evening, please click the raised hand button and leave it raised, and we will allow you to speak one by one. And please state your full name and if you live or work in the city of Binghamton. We do have one hand up. Looks like their name is Passion. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Good
Yes.
evening. Thank you.
Hi, so I watched your city council meeting on Monday and I see you guys want to give $1 million of the ARPA funds to the police department. Well, first of all, police don't, you think this is going to lower the crime rates. The police don't show up before a crime. Most of the time they're showing up after the crime happens. So more
I'm
money
sorry to
going
interrupt. Could you please state your full name and if you live or work in the city of Binghamton?
My full name is Passion. I live in the city of Binghamton.
Okay, thank you.
So you guys, like I was saying, you want to give $1 million of the ARPA funds, which is supposed to go to the people. You want to give that to the police. Well, the police don't show up before a crime. Like I said, like I was saying before, most of the time they show up after a crime happens. So more money going into police is not going to stop crime. You're just going to have more clueless officers showing up to a situation that they don't know what's going on. You want to stop violence? You want to lower crime rates? You put that into the people, put that into the community, put that money into youth programs, put that money towards mental health, put that money towards housing. It all connects. As we've seen in multiple cases, people, especially white people in particular, love to weaponize the police, as there's been multiple cases of this across the country. Okay. And I believe Monday, I don't know who it was, maybe it was the mayor had quoted a quote by Joe Biden saying that, you know, use the funds or lose the funds. Well, you guys love to quote the president when it's convenient for you, right? Well, your president also said, as we know, the tragedy that happened in Buffalo, the shooter came from our area, the Broome County area. And this is not a surprise. What happened in Buffalo, sadly, I'm not surprised by it. And it doesn't shock me that this person came from this area, because this area is a breeding ground for white supremacy. I've called you guys out on your white supremacy, right? Especially Sophia Resinetti. You guys, like I said, your president also said your president also said that if you're silent about white supremacy, your silence is complicity. So stop being silent about it. We've been trying to tell you guys this, that there's a problem in this area, especially with racism, and it goes back, and this goes back years. This is historic. It goes back years with the police. This is the breeding ground for, this was the headquarters for the KKK. Okay. And like I said, your silence is complicity. You guys are being complicit. So stop use the money, use the ARPA money how it was supposed to be used. Go back into the people. How about you all take the first step in getting out of your delusional reality, whatever world that you're living in, and start really getting into the community, getting with the people. I'm not just talking about using a press conference to your advantage. Really get to know your people. Get to know people with mental health issues, because that's the issue. A lot of the times, I believe you guys aren't you guys, if you guys are going to use the ARPA funds, you give it to the police, have a mental health therapist or somebody who specializes in mental health, because we know that's not the police. They don't know how to de-escalate situations at all. And I've been a witness to this multiple times. No de-escalation skills whatsoever. So a lot of the times these violent cases, these violence, gun violence, the mental health is a big thing that ties into it. I don't see a lot of money going into mental health. I don't see $1 million going into mental health for this community. There's been a lot of suicides along with gun violence, and
You have 1 minute remaining.
Is that it's only going to get worse because you guys continue to ignore the people. You guys continue to ignore us. We've been knocking, we've been asking, but we're not going to knock no more. We're tired of knocking and asking. We are hungry. Please let us in. We're about to start we're about to bang the door down. We just gonna come in. But that's all I got to say. So yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. If there's anyone else that would like to speak via Zoom, please click the raised hand button and leave it raised. And please tell us if you live or work in the city of Binghamton and state your full name for the record. Our next speaker is Tina Chronopoulos. We'll allow them to speak now.
Can you hear me?
Ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. I'm starting my timer. My name is Tina Chronopoulos. I live in Binghamton in the district headed by Sophia Reseniti. A couple of things that I want to talk about tonight. One of them is the lockdown law that was announced to the news by Jared Graham last week. So what I find troublesome about this, and this has been called out before, is that the mayor, whether that's Jared Graham or Rich David before him, would basically go to the news and say, this is what we're going to do, but hasn't yet received approval from city council. So this just is basically an example of how you are being used as a rubber stamping body and basically are complicit in doing that. And not only is this troublesome because of the way that you do your work, but also because this lockdown law is probably going to target specific people in our community. So I find it particularly galling to then see Jared Graham tweeting publicly about, the tragedy in Buffalo and how the residents of Binghamton, rah, 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 so terrible, we're so sad. And yet at the same time, you are about to enact a law or bring back a law that some of the effects will actually be racism. So that's what I would call, along with what the previous caller said, this is kind of low-key white supremacy in action, and then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, yes, indeed, is what you are going to do tonight is to give $1 million to the police department, which has over the last years continued to receive millions and millions of dollars, but we're not actually seeing any effect. And so as the previous caller said, you may well be aware what happened in Buffalo is somebody who, the shooter, the white supremacist, the terrorist, comes from Conklin. And a thing that he talks about in his manifesto is the Great Replacement, right? And some of you, I don't know if folks here in this audience watch Fox News. Maybe you do. I'm sorry if you do, because I'm sure your brain has lots of holes in it. And Tucker Carlson is on that show, and he has mentioned the Great Replacement about 400 times. I don't know over how many years, but he is one of the reasons that people in this country believe, that the white people are somehow dying off and that racism isn't a real thing. Another thing that the shooter, and the reason I'm talking about this is directly relevant to what you all are doing. The shooter also worships the police, right? And so when we have somebody on city council, like the person who supposedly is representing me, posting online about the thin blue line and back the blue, that is a dog whistle. That is a dog whistle. When you say back the blue, when you say the thin blue line, what you are saying is blue lives matter. And what you are saying when blue lives matter, you are very clearly saying black lives don't matter. Okay, and I've talked about this before here and in other contexts. You cannot choose whether you are born Black. You cannot choose whether you are born trans. You cannot choose whether you are born disabled. You cannot choose whether you are born Jewish, but you can well choose whether you become a police officer or not. So when somebody says, like Sophia Reseniti, who purports to represent everyone in her district when she so clearly doesn't, that you back the thin blue line and you back the blue,
You have 1 minute left.
you believe that Black lives don't matter, even if you publicly say, oh, but I believe that all lives matter, and I don't think that people in Binghamton are racist, and I certainly am not racist because I still haven't heard you apologize to Dr. Angela Riley on this committee for the scene that you threw about how your feelings were hurt when Dr. Angela Riley was talking very clearly about how she was afraid when the police was standing behind her. That's what true leadership looks like. And I haven't seen it from you. I'm sorry to say. And so when you are then going to vote to give $1 million to the police, you are basically saying, oh, we feel so bad about what happened in Buffalo, but we're just going to continue to be white supremacists right here in Binghamton. Watch us do it because we can. And guess who made it all possible? The worship of Donald Trump. Take good care.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Would anyone else be willing to speak? I can't see the name on this one, but the next person with their hands up, we will allow them to speak.
Hi, good evening. This is Tark Delzum, 17 Tremont. I'm disappointed there still seems to be 7 council members seated. I would like to, I watched, well, 2 things. I watched the Friday session regarding code enforcement. I was extremely puzzled. You basically talked about everything but housing and building code enforcement. Maybe you should just call it like the task force to try to solve things that annoy white homeowners. I don't know. But it's definitely a puzzling conversation. I would also say that if you truly wanted community input, you wouldn't host that meeting on a Friday at 5:30. It's just clear that you do everything possible to avoid inclusive community input. Secondly, I'd like to talk about this allocation of pandemic recovery funds to the police. There was a ridiculous comment made by Mr. Scanlon, where that if you actually try to think and reimagine what it means to have a safe community, that we want to uphold the safety of all residents, that you basically hate the police, that you don't support them. So let me posit another scenario, is that if we're talking about infrastructure investments and we carve out 20% to improve sidewalks, so those who have mobility issues can move around the city without problems, that we will also use some of those road repair funds to actually paint bike lanes and build dedicated lanes, to do traffic signals that can help those with disabilities. Would you say you hate cars? Or would you recognize that what the person is advocating for is a system that addresses the needs of all residents, and that infrastructure dollars, which traditionally had been roads, needs to be reimagined? Mr. Scanlon, you make childish statements to incite division. And as the previous caller mentioned, you are echoing the same kind of white supremacist language and dog whistles that lead to incredible violence and harm, particularly to Black and Brown residents. It's disgraceful. So let's just think about this. If somebody is food insecure and they were shoplifting, our solution is we arrest them. If somebody's homeless, we arrest them. If somebody's struggling with mental health, we arrest them. If somebody's struggling with addiction, we arrest them. Distressed youth who get in fights and engage in violence in need of care, mentoring, and programs, but there's a lack of them, we arrest them. White supremacy sees all of these issues as nails, and the only hammer is a police force. And what so many people across this country have been advocating for, and right here in the city, some very brave multiracial coalition, folks that are putting themselves at risk for the kind of racist terrorism that we saw meted out to a innocent community in Buffalo. You're contributing to that. And we need to stop thinking about law enforcement as the only lever towards achieving a safe community. We should invest in more access to food. We should invest in more safe and affordable housing. We should invest in programs to improve people's financial security. We should invest and rebuild the devastated mental health system that we used to have in this country and in this county. We should invest in addiction services. We should invest in our youth. But this council again and again.
You have 1 minute left.
Back to the one hammer that it knows. And I would say that it's because you are all a combination of naive and ignorant and uninformed, and also upholding the power structures of white supremacy. It's a combination of both, and it's a dangerous mix. But you really should have asked the officer and those who came down, what are other 5 strategies to prevent crime that do not involve the law enforcement? If they can't name one, then that means all of the money we've invested in training has been wasted. They should be able to name a number. And I truly, truly hope that one thing, if this is going to pass, we all know that, that's why people don't call in. But I would encourage somebody to add an amendment that 30 days from now, there must be a dedicated website on the city website detailing
Your 5
exactly how
minutes is up.
every ARPA dollar has been spent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. At this time, anyone else wishing to speak via Zoom, please click the raised hand button and leave it raised, and we will allow you to speak one by one.
Seeing no other requests for discussion, the chair moves forward on the agenda. Thank you all. In accordance with chamber rules, we will move forward with first read legislation. For the preferred agenda, do any council members wish to remove any requests for legislation or provide good cause that merits an abstention? The chair seeing none, Mr. Clerk will read the first introductory ordinance into the roll.
Yes. So the first item on tonight's preferred agenda is introductory ordinance 22-83, considered in the Finance Committee. This is an ordinance to amend the 2022 city fee schedule to include Ely Park Golf Course in-season rates.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk.
Next item, we have introductory ordinance 22-84, considered in the Planning Committee. And this is an ordinance authorizing Park Outdoor Advertising of New York Incorporated to replace an existing billboard with one digital sign face at 159.5 North Griswold Street.
Any discussion? Chair recognizes Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Scaringi. I just wanted to highlight something, an important piece of information about this legislation that convinced me to support it, because the documentation that was submitted with the RL initially had some reasons in support of changing the sign face to a digital one and some against. And I wanted to thank Councilman Burns for asking a question or bringing up the point that the lights on the digital sign are actually dimmer than and less reflective than the signs that currently exist. And so while a digital billboard seems like it would contribute more light pollution, it actually contributes less light pollution. So I wanted to highlight that as an important little tidbit. And I think the thing that convinced me to support this legislation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other discussion? Mr. Clerk.
Okay, the next item on the preferred agenda is introductory ordinance 22-85, considered in the Finance Committee. And this is an ordinance to amend the 2022 insurance fund budget to increase revenue for an anticipated insurance recovery and create an expense line for an emergency demolition at 159 Conklin Avenue.
Any discussion? Mr. Clerk.
Next item is introductory ordinance 22-86, considered in the Finance Committee. And this is an ordinance to amend the 2022 finance budget to adjust the staff accountant and finance payroll specialist annual salary and increase the travel and training line.
Any discussion? Mr. Clerk.
Next, we have introductory ordinance 22-88, considered in planning. And this is an ordinance amending permanent ordinance 22-03 to add a reverter clause.
Any discussion? Mr. Clerk.
And the last item on tonight's preferred agenda is introductory resolution 22-54, considered in finance. And this is a resolution, to accept a $250,000 grant from the US DOT Recreational Trails Program to be used at Ross Park.
Any discussion? Seeing none, the chair will entertain a motion to accept the preferred agenda as submitted.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Councilwoman Friedman, seconded by Councilman Scanlon. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Roll call, Mr. Clerk. My apologies. Have it.
Councilwoman Resnetti,
Aye.
Councilwoman Riley,
Aye.
Councilwoman Friedman,
Aye.
Councilman Burns,
Aye.
Councilman Scanlon,
Aye.
President Strawn is absent, and President Pro Tem Scarinci.
Aye.
That's 6 ayes, 1 absent. Strawn.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Apologies. Thank you, Court Counsel. On the agenda and chamber rules, we'll move forward with the non-preferred agenda. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Scanlon for the purposes of a motion considered in the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Councilman Scarinci. I stand to ask for unanimous consideration for introductory ordinance 22-87, an ordinance to amend the 2022 budget to allocate ARPA funds to support gun violence reduction programs through the Southern Tier Crime Analysis Center.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion by Councilman Scanlon, seconded by Councilwoman Rezanetti. Any discussion? Chair recognizes Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Scarinci. So I, surprised to no one, I have a lot of issues with this piece of legislation. As we've been saying over and over and over again, the ARPA funds are supposed to be used for COVID relief. And while I understand that the pandemic has made people more anxious and has exacerbated mental health issues in many cases, I just feel like this is such an inappropriate use of this money. And that's not to say that gun violence isn't a serious issue. Obviously it is, but this is not the funding to do it, to solve this issue. And also, I don't think that giving money to, the Southern Tier Crime Analysis Center, which is in many senses kind of an extension of the police department, is appropriate. I know that President Biden said that municipalities could use this funding for that, but as with anything, just because we can doesn't mean we should. I'm also troubled by the fact that when the police reinvention and reimagination committee, I forgive me if I'm getting that name, the words in that name wrong, but the police reinvention committee met and submitted their final report. When we were in budget season, I had brought up a proposal to allocate some money from, I believe it was the contingency line, in order to execute the suggestions or the propositions within that plan, some of which overlap with what this $1 million would supposedly go toward. And during the budget season, I was told, no, we are not going to allocate any money in our budget in order to execute these proposals. So now, why, once President Biden says, oh, you can use this money for the police, now all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, these are all of these proposals that need to be funded. Where was the foresight in this? Why didn't we allocate money for this when these proposals first came out? $1 million, I mean, that could do so much to improve the material conditions of people whose lives were made worse by COVID. And we've seen a little bit of data that gun violence or shots fired reports have gone up in the city of Binghamton. I think there were 7 more shots fired. Don't quote me on this. Something like 7 more shots fired in the city this year than last year. And I just, that to me doesn't justify spending $1 million. The one aspect that I agree with in this proposal is crime prevention through environmental design. That to me is legitimate crime prevention. That's when you take the environment, the physical environment, and fix it in a way that prevents, that reduces crime. The example that was provided when I asked about what that was, months and months ago, whenever it first came up in a meeting, was let's say there's a street corner where there's a tree that's blocking a street light, causing the corner to be shrouded in darkness. And we see that there are a high number of muggings on that street corner. The environmental design would then trim back the tree so that the street corner would be illuminated, thereby preventing crimes from being committed. That's legit in my opinion. But things, other things that just kind of like give more power to the police, I fail to see how this is relevant to COVID. And I also can't support giving $1 million now when we did not support funding any of these initiatives when they first came out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other discussion? Seeing none, does someone, Chair recognizes Councilwoman Riley.
Thank you for that, Pro Tem Garenzi. So $1 million is nothing to sneeze at. If either of us had $1 million, we would change how we existed, our frame of reference, our thoughts, how we conceptualize just daily activities of living would change. And I think because of our poverty index, again, and because of how Binghamton is composed of several various representatives in the community, which caused us to receive this chunk of money. We forget that we are representing everyone, which includes the quote unquote even the least of these, those that don't vote, those that have given up on the political system because we are continuously ignored, those of us that are shot and targeted and maligned in meetings and outside of meetings through various scandalous acts. I bring this up because, again, because we have the money before us, we've forgotten what it means to be fiscally responsible and fiduciary agents for the city. Now, do we need support? Do we need finances to extend services? Absolutely. Absolutely. And although Mr. Scandalous said that I was not pro-police, it is important to say that I am pro everyone. I said that at the rally too. I'm pro quite a bit. But the point is, as fiduciary agents, when a proposal is brought before us, even though, think about your work life. If you were reviewing a grant and someone brought $1 million proposal to you and the budget did not outline how that $1 million would be allocated, they just said, well, maybe this, maybe that, you would not approve such grants. If your children came to you and said, I need $1 million, some of it's going here, there, where have you, but then they're going to invest some to charity. And you're like, well, how much is going to charity? Oh, it's going to be based upon other factors. Just give it to me. Would you give your children that money? We can even say that about $20. Taylor asked me for $20. I didn't give it to her because where was my $20 going? Anyway, so I bring this up because last March, members of our council, members of our community sat for several nights to listen to community feedback, business feedback as part of the Police Reform Reinvention Collaborative. Remember this big book, those of us that printed it? And we paid, I think, about $60,000 to receive a report from the Finn Institute. Is that correct? So the Finn Institute gave us, because we paid for their knowledge and their information. And they talked about the first priority and even assessing our current structure is the need to build trust. They talked about the building of trust in the community from the police perspective from page 81, probably all the way to about page 95. So that's number one. To me, usually when you allocate a lot of pages, that tells you what they deem a priority. Again, we paid them for their advice. So part of their strategies, they outlined 19 bullet points that was then brought to the collaborative, which my fellow council, I don't think any of you here were on, but I know, oh yes, Mr. Campbell. Those of you that sat, you again listen to the bullets, and they said, number 5 was, consider a community advisory board. Consider what form of external citizen oversight is necessary and should establish such. Continue the efforts to diversify BPD's ranks. Consider deployment of officers on foot. We talked about that one at length on Monday. And there's several more. So I encourage you all to look at this artifact we paid $60-something thousand for. I can't remember the price, but we paid for this. So we should use it. It appears that we have not used it beyond the initial goal to complete a task. Finally, one of the ones I wanted to highlight was consider a deflection, police-led diversion program for substance abusers. And then it talks about de-escalation training apart from SIT and using some standardized curriculum. And that's fine. So then we lean on our neighbors and friends and the task force and the 2 council members that were representing us. And they create goals. 5 pages of goals. How many of you, 6 pages, I'm sorry, 6 pages of goals. How many council members looked at these when we were comparing what was proposed for this $1 million? Yes, no. Did we look at these goals? No. Okay. And it's okay. It's okay because this was what we said we prioritized when we were going to restructure and reimagine police safety in our community. It was done in a process that was vetted and approved by council. There were people appointed to this council, to this task force, and there were goals. I mean, these people dedicated their lives. They gave away family time to create 6 goals with several bullets. Not many were mentioned in this $1 million investment. So that makes me ask, that leads me to question, was this performative? Should these objectives, these goals then be used to outline how we will spend the money? Which typically, if you invest in a company to assess, evaluate, and provide a plan, you then begin implementing the plan. I don't see that we've connected it in that way. So on Monday, we quoted Joe Biden quite frequently, which was great, shows bipartisan effort. And I went to the language that Joe Biden shared, and he did talk about using our money, but he talked about prioritizing it based upon your community's needs. So he also gave, which I love to share, I often share exemplars. You know, I always share them. And then there's a couple of council that I always say, well, what does this have to do with us? I believe in looking at other models, especially if they can be extrapolated and or revised. The data can be extrapolated and we can use it to our own programs and services. Nevertheless, in there, they mentioned not only major cities, but small cities and small counties that one may say could be exemplars for Binghamton. But if you look at what they allocated or how they allocated their resources, a majority of them looked at the systemic problems and ensured that those were priorities within the allocation of the ARP funding. We've heard time and time again that our community needs help. Yes, we've allocated money towards housing, but what about reentry? What about the people that are walking because they have a disorder where they're dependent on substances, but don't know where to go to end that dependence? Nor do they trust the systems because the systems have consistently failed them. Where is our dedication to supporting services to support those residents? The non-voters, the non-taxpayers, but the ones we see on Main Street, the ones we see in Speedway, they're our neighbors too. So I brought up a few of the cities. And of course, now I can't read them, but I'll just tell you. One city said they were going to allocate resources to ease the burden on police by increasing community violence intervention, crisis responders, and substance use disorder and mental health services. We mentioned the CRT, we did. We mentioned community policing, we did. But can you tell me how much we're allocating to either? In another city, they also are contributing 1% to police overtime, 50% to a new community violence intervention and prevention program, 0.5% to a gun back initiative, and the remaining funds will go to a forensic science assistance, park rangers and park safety, and a community reentry program. Baltimore, which we know, we've heard a lot about Baltimore, and they have invested, again, a different size city, different composition entirely, but I just wanted to share this one. 50 million over the next 3 years of their ARP money on comprehensive violence prevention strategies, including community violence intervention programs, victim service support, youth justice efforts, re-entry services, again, re-entry services, job training, mental health support. They will also support services in the community to increase case management, emergency housing, relocation assistance for people at imminent risk of being the victim of violence, and transitional employment programming, all part of that violence reduction strategy. And you say, well, Councilwoman Riley, we have organizations that do that. And all of those organizations have come and asked for support either through CDBG funding or through the various organizations we all commit our time to. And if they have a need and they're not able to meet the need, and this is what we say we want to see in terms of improvement, and this is based upon evidence-based data, evidence-based strategies, not a chunk of data based upon one's own desire, but research, years of research that showed positive outcomes. So I just wanted to share this with you guys because I think it's critical for us to really understand our role, understand who we represent. And we represent police too. Listen, I told you, although, you know, we have people with prophetic gifts that know how I will vote, which we should lean on a little more frequently since they have such gifts. But we need to be mindful because we were given a gift, but that gift was based upon the poverty of our community. And so we need to make sure we are hearing the voices of those that are crying, and they may not be crying the loudest, but those are the ones that are crying without access and may not have proximity to the table, but we said we represent them. So I want you guys to think about these things. Think about the time we invested in this Reinvestment Act. Think about how we allocate our resources and what we need to do better as a council and as a city for the residents in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further discussion? Chair recognizes Councilman Burns.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank Councilwoman Friedman and Councilwoman Riley for their comments, and I agree with them. There's a lot to be done. All the work that Councilman Riley did just now and just went through. I mean, she's absolutely 100% right. We need to do more. And I find myself, we are, the fact that this legislation even needs to come forward is sad. There's a sadness, especially the fact that, as Passion said so passionately, that, this person that went to Buffalo, just, lives just a few miles away from us. And I think it just brings a sadness over, a cloud over our area that we have to take a serious look at. And we can say, oh, this is not who we are, but you know what? It is who we are. It is. This is really happening. So, and I'm not saying that the people in Binghamton are did this or racist or anything like that, but the guy came from here. I'd also like to point out, though, to Passion and others that, you know, Passion said that the KKK headquarters was here at one time. I've heard that over and over again, but there's also in the courthouse square, there's a monument, a Civil War monument, and there's a list of names of men from Binghamton that fought in that war and died in that war to stop slavery. And I like to think of, when I think of Broome County, that's what I look at. I look at, you know, the good things that are here, and there's a lot of them. But in Binghamton right now, we have a problem. We have a gun problem. We have a crime problem. And I do know that we've added, you know, the last administration added 16 cops, and crime went up, and here we are asking for more. And you know, I have my grandchild Ruby sitting over there tonight, came with me. I was the babysitter and I couldn't get my relief, so she came with me. And she's going to be with me for 4 days. Her parents went away for the weekend. But there's grandparents all over the city of Binghamton this weekend that don't know if their children are safe playing out in their front yard. We had a 12-year-old girl who got murdered walking her dog. And I, for one, am willing to say, okay, Mr. Mayor, okay, Chief Sikorsky, okay, Captain Bidwell, if you can tell us that you're gonna really do something with this money, then I'm willing to say yes. I'm willing to give you that chance. But I asked our council, Mr. President, that 6 months from now, let's bring Officer Bidwell back and say, how have you spent the money? Have you seen any, do we have any data that this money is going to good use? But I don't believe that we can sit here and do nothing. And the President of the United States, I went to the White House page when the mayor quoted them the other day. I wanted to make sure that I had it and heard it right, because I hadn't heard it until the mayor said it. But here from the White House, the President of the United States, that President Biden issued a call for state and local leaders to dedicate more American Rescue Plan funding to make our communities safer and deploy these dollars quickly. So there I am. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Any further discussion? Chair recognizes Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Scringi. I'll be brief, but there was a tension or not, what's the word that I'm looking for? Two conflicting things here that I didn't verbalize in my comment. And, we have been citing the police reimagination and reinvention collaborative plan because it overlaps with what this funding is proposed to do. Now, the disconnect that I'm seeing here that I didn't voice before is that the most recent and high profile incident of gun violence happened when a white supremacist mass shooter from our area went to Buffalo specifically because it had a high percentage of Black residents there. And he thought that it would increase his chances of killing the most Black people. That's an incident of gun violence that we saw most recently. The police reimagination collaborative came about in response to an incident of police brutality against a Black man, George Floyd, who was murdered by police. So there's a disconnect here. We talk about gun violence, but who's really the perpetrators of gun violence? We see so many mass shootings across the country that are executed by white supremacists, self-avowed white supremacists. So we talk about gun violence, but who's doing the gun violence? Who are we trying to surveil? Whose neighborhoods are we going to increase the police presence in because they are so-called hotspots? Who lives there? Why do we need to work so hard to gain the trust of the community by the police? Why is the community distrustful of the police? Well, because they're so often stereotyped and brutalized by the police. So it's kind of like it's a false equivalence in my mind. It's a false equivalence of trying to prevent gun violence that came out of a plan that the governor required because of a Black man was murdered by the police in an instance of police brutality. And then we're saying gun violence, such as a white supremacist mass shooter, that's what we need to be looking at with this funding. I'm sorry, I said I would be brief. I am often verbose, but I really felt like that needed to be said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further discussion? Hearing none, does a member call the question?
Call the question. Mr. President.
Question's been called. The clerk will call the roll.
Councilwoman Resnetti,
Aye.
Councilwoman Riley,
Nay.
Councilwoman Friedman,
Nay.
Councilman Burns,
Aye.
Councilman Scanlon,
Aye.
President Strawn is absent, and President Pro Tem Scarinci.
Aye.
That's 4 ayes, 2 nays, Riley and Friedman, with 1 absent Strawn.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll move on to communications from council members. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Friedman, District 4.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Scarinci. Obviously, the incident in Buffalo is weighing heavily on all of us. And, you know, like I teach sometimes in SV high school, you know, and not that I'm necessarily the closest. I've made a deliberate effort to not remember to not learn or remember the terrorist's name. But maybe I saw them in class once. Maybe they were in my virtual Zoom classroom. I don't know. And so it raises the issue of obviously gun violence. But again, I think we have to be more specific here. Yeah, it's gun violence, but it's gun violence motivated by white supremacy. That's the access to guns is an issue, but the white supremacy is the motivation for this crime. And we, you know, I don't think anyone would, or not anyone, I don't think many people would come out and explicitly say, oh, I'm a white supremacist. But many times through action, whether it be implicitly or explicitly, I say we because, you know, sometimes I uphold systems that unintentionally reinforce white supremacy. That's something that I have dedicated my life to unlearning and working against and trying to. But I mean, we have to call it what it is. It's a terrorist attack by a white supremacist, and I don't think we can just write it off as like, oh, he was crazy and that's it, because this happens all the time. This is happening all the time, all over the country. And you can look at the way that the news reports on shooter and the way that they treat, and you see the disparity in how we treat and report on Black people and communities of color. This white supremacist shooter was taken in alive. So we have the capability of taking people in alive, and yet that privilege of being taken in alive by the police is not afforded to many people of color who are viewed as a threat. And this really worries me, because no one's going to come out and say, I'm a white supremacist. I just don't think that that's going to happen. And yet, what are we doing that is upholding white supremacy? Things like giving $1 million to surveil high crime areas. Why are they high crime areas? Maybe because people's basic needs are not being met. Maybe they're high crime areas because we have more cops there, so they catch more people. My heart is broken, and I don't want to come off like I'm being callous about this, but I ran for office because I really wanted to make a change. And I know that's a cliche thing to say. I know everybody says that, right? Some people run for office because they want to build up their resume, but I think a lot of people run for office because they legitimately want to make a change. And here we are spinning our wheels in the face of homegrown terror. We have an opportunity here to change the material conditions of people's lives, ravaged by COVID, ravaged by poverty, ravaged by food deserts, ravaged by mental health issues and lack of access to mental health care. And what are we doing? What are we doing? Right? We can say gun violence is a problem, but we can't keep beating our heads against the wall and saying, oh, let's give more money to the police. What would the police have done in this situation? They didn't stop. There was even an armed security guard, a good guy with a gun, if you will. And the police showed up after, what was it, 10 or 11 people died? The safest communities are not the ones with the most police. They're the ones with the most resources. They're the ones with the least desperation, where people are able to provide for their kids. They have a safe place to sleep at night. They don't have to move from one slumlord property to another to escape the black mold and bed bugs. Those are the safest communities, not the ones with the most surveillance and the most cops. And I wish I had an answer. I wish I had a crystal ball. I wish I could just wave my magic wand and everyone would be safe and cared for. I don't have a magic wand, but I can use data. I can look to other cities and see what's working and what's not. We can look and see that despite giving millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to the police department, gun violence went up in the city of Binghamton. We had an increase in shots fired and the data shows that gun violence went up. So why are we still putting money towards the same things? Are we going to eventually get to a point where 100% of the city of Binghamton budget funded by taxpayers goes to the police? Will we be safe then? Will we have a thriving community then? How much money? 50%, 75%? 75 cents out of every dollar that I pay in taxes goes to police that are surveilling my community. That's when I'll be safe. But we could try it, or we can look at data and see what works. And I ran for office to make a difference, and here I am feeling powerless in meetings where I'm supposed to represent my community, my constituents, many of whom are people of color, and I just get outvoted every time. What am I supposed to do? Should I resign? I think some people would be happy to see me resign, but this is, we can't keep beating our heads against a wall and hoping that something is suddenly going to change without actually changing circumstances that we live and work in the city of Binghamton. Wish I had something more enlightening or uplifting to say, but unfortunately I don't. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. The chair recognizes Councilman Burns, District 5.
I think I said it all when we had our discussions about what was passed this evening. On a brighter note, we did have a wonderful South Side Neighborhood Assembly concert. Went very well. We had over 100 people that came to the concert, and it's a small area, so it's at the Commons. It looked very crowded. And we have another one next month, June 19th. We're looking forward to that. I want to thank the Parks Department for helping us out. We had a bit of a snafu, and it was the weekend, and they still jumped right on it and saved us. And that's about it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Scanlon, District 7.
Thank you, Councilman. I don't know where to start here. So Councilwoman Riley alluded to the fact that I said she does not support the Binghamton Police Department, which if you look back in the 2.5 years we've been on council, I would say there's probably 10 or 12 votes where we had an opportunity to support the Binghamton Police Department. And every single time, including tonight, Angela Riley has voted no to support the police. So it's not her to draw a line there why she doesn't support the Binghamton Police Department. She also mentioned that Baltimore and what they're doing with ARPA funds. The murder rate in Baltimore is up 31%. I'm not sure what they're doing with ARPA funds is working in Baltimore. I'm not sure how people think less cops would be safer. That's just ludicrous to think like that to me. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Rezanetti, District 2.
Thank you. It really is really difficult to express the sadness and anger felt over the shooting last week and the taking of so many innocent lives. Hate such as what we saw and senseless violence has absolutely no place in our society. I'm praying for the Buffalo community and really for our entire nation. It feels especially to me like our young people are in a crisis, and we need to find more ways to address what is happening. I certainly don't believe there's one way to, excuse me, address it all. As a mental health clinician, I've always placed importance on mental health services, and we absolutely need to be looking at this particular issue more than ever. My thoughts and prayers have been and will continue to be with all those who lost their loved ones. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the family of the security guard for what they have to deal with as well, who, as we know, did what he could to try to stop the shooter and ultimately lost his life. On a lighter note, I'd like to say congratulations to all of our graduates. Some are graduating right now, this week, I believe, next week. And those are the folks that are going to hopefully make our future a better one. Lastly, I wanted to say that, maybe some of you know that May 15th through the 21st is National Public Works Week. And during this time, we shed a little bit of light on the brave and very essential role that public works employees play. And we are all very familiar with a very long list of what it is that they do. So I want to say thank you to our Department of Public Works for everything that you do. And that's all I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Rezanetti. Just a few things. I want to thank all the residents who, my goodness, my deepest apologies. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Riley, District 3. My apologies, Councilwoman.
Thank you. There has been a lot said, and this has been an interesting week. But as I've shared with my colleagues, I've remained silent as best as I could because so many things are going through my head. I'll tell you guys. So we started off the weekend with a bang. We united to talk about removing hands off of our bodies and trying to encourage a certain subset of the population to stop legislating for things for which they don't understand. That was fueled by certain subsets of the population, particularly for me, telling me how to perform my city council work here locally. So we go from someone telling me how to do my job to advocating for policy change, upholding protections regarding sexual health for my body, which is being again argued by a certain subset of the population, to another subset of the population continuing to wreak havoc on the lives of people that look like me. I've been getting calls from media, from neighbors, from people across the country. And my colleagues tried to make me feel better because they say, yes, you are an elected official and you are the only Black elected official in this region. Yes, I know that. However, you don't need to call me, write me to ask me about how you would feel if you were targeted. You don't need to ask my opinion of how a Black person is taking the consistent mistreatment and hate and disrespect. And when I say disrespect, we know what I'm talking about. This young man grew up here. He was proud of his understanding of the Great Replacement Theory that was promoted by a media center that many of you probably frequent, and was supported and touted. The same theory was touted by elected officials that also support these media centers. He drove, as you all know from here, about 3 hours, maybe, with a firearm he also purchased from here. And like Passion said, you want to know how Black people feel? We're not surprised because we live it. Be it explicit bias, implicit bias, be it disrespect, and yes, in this region, this county, this state, in this room, it's a problem. It's a problem. And this is not because I said something to a group of people in city council. It's because of how I was born. There's a difference. There's a difference. And as my fellow council member said, not only was this man able to live stream his rant, he walked away alive. Don't ask me how I feel. Racism is built into our political and economic systems. We see that when we legislate. We see that when we allocate resources that again support the greatest of these. And that's why cities like Buffalo, like Binghamton, remain divided. And why Black people in this country have been denied access to quality health care, housing, resources, and food. You know why I say food? If you look at, now I can't think of the name of the building that the police said they are going to increase over in your district. Town and country. Without transportation, before that grocery store was created, how would they have gotten groceries? Have you ever walked with a bag of groceries? Have you ever walked with multiple bags of groceries for your family? Even in the 3rd district, we do have the store on Glenwood Ave, but that's far too. The people in Buffalo are now without a supermarket in an area that we all know and we're able to quote was one of the most minoritized communities in Buffalo. And you say, how do I feel? Don't ask me, because I won't be political. So in the face of this unspeakable trauma that we endure and that they have endured recently, they have to now readjust, not only to make their children feel safe, but we have to make our children feel safe too. Because my child said, oh my God, he's from here. What am I gonna do? My child that you all know asked that question. Don't ask me how I feel. So anyway, instead of continuing to be sad, and you hear it in my voice, because I tried not to stay here, but we need to fight. Well, first of all, let me say this. This is not my fight. This is for you all that don't look like me to start calling out racist behavior in your family. Start calling out the jokes that they think are funny, that are inappropriate. If they wouldn't tell it if I was at the table with you, then they shouldn't tell it. And then if you have people that are showing signs, get help. Get help. Again, this is not my fault. You call it out. You call it out because I'm tired. But as an elected official, we need to do more about guns. And we talked about that. And we talked about and I laugh, I chuckle because I think about the military grade weapons. And I don't need a speech about military grade weapons. But we have the power to fight and add laws, regulations, and access. We learned about ghost guns. There's things we can do locally. and we can unite and fight for federal changes as well. So I stand here and I mourn with everyone affected by the loss in Buffalo. People we know that know people that lost people. But I mourn for those of us who are walking around, guessing your true intention when you speak. But I call all of you to join with me as we continue to, again, legislate for things to stop gun violence based upon data, not a bucket of money that's not outlined as we would ask any other representative coming to council to outline how they're allocating the money, how they plan to spend the money, but based upon evidence-based data. Supporting universal background checks, banning civilian ownership of assault or military type weapons, blocking access to guns to those who have been found in a court of law to be dangerous to themselves or others, which includes any type of behavioral health issues that resulted in them going to court, creating a national registry of gun ownership to aid our law enforcement in tracking. And Councilman Burns asked, would this money go towards helping track the purchase of guns? They said no. They said no. So what is the money going to? But we're done with that. It's already passed. And then finally, investing in true research, studying the impact, causes, and cures of gun violence. Not anecdotal data, not data that was presented at a conference 30 years ago. We want true data that, again, can be with strategies that can be implemented, adapted and implemented in cities across the country. And I want us again, and I say us as elected officials, not as me as a member of minoritized community. As elected officials, we use our platform to not only represent everyone for whom we serve, but to refrain from epitaphs that continue to divide us. Refrain from jokes and dangerous, untrue conspiracy theories, particularly anecdotal data, which if you look at voting record, does not imply anything, which is why we have the discussions before we vote. We also have to use our power and our platforms to strengthen hate crime laws, to create punishment for racial terrorists that is commensurate with the collective trauma they cause. And not just the trauma felt by those in proximity to the crime, but the ripple effect that has affected not only those in this person in this room, but Binghamton High School and your neighbors. Thank you. Oh, and before I close, there will be a prayer vigil tomorrow at 7 Court Street, the MLK. I can't think of the official name anymore. The Promenade, thank you. The Peacemaker Stage at 6 p.m. And they are collecting donations because, as I mentioned, the residents that live in that community that was affected, that has reached worldwide attention, no longer have a grocery store. So they are collecting donations, canned donations, financial donations, toiletries, as well as praying. Because even though I joked about someone and their prophetic gifts, I know God is in control. And prayer changes things. So I encourage you guys to be there, not to take political pictures, but to be there authentically. For this to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. As an aside, my eyes move from one paper to another, from my name list to my notes. So Councilwoman, was that purposeful? I apologize that I missed your name on that list. Want to thank everyone for all of the discussion, for the phone, for the people that called in, for a follow-up on some of the comments made during constituent phone calls. There were some points that were brought up regarding the MPAA committee. So the reason why housing wasn't mentioned at that meeting was because for the agenda that we all unanimously discussed and agreed to, both in person and electronically on earlier meetings, all my colleagues had this out that went out on April 10th. The meeting 1 would discuss quality of life issues and code practices. Meeting 2 would discuss housing standards and vacant properties. Meeting 3 would discuss rental registry and code models. Meeting number 1 is the meeting that we just held last Friday. Meeting number 2, a doodle poll will be sent out as we agreed by last time within the next 48 hours, and I'll get that out to my colleagues. In addition, the reason why the meeting was Friday at 5:30, because again, as my colleagues and I unanimously agreed to, a doodle poll went out, and that was the day that worked for the most members. There were days on the doodle poll that ranged all the way from Monday through Friday. Number 2, I want to thank the DPW for all the work that they've been doing, especially filling up potholes throughout the city and in the 1st District. I want to thank residents on May Street who were really negatively impacted by the snowstorm, who met with me last week, and the really good discussions about getting that cleared up. I'd like to congratulate all of our college and university graduates, as well as, because we've got a little bit of a break with our next meeting, but coming up obviously very soon, Binghamton High School, Seton Catholic, and all of our K through 8 students as well, grade students who are going to be graduating. So I want to congratulate them and all of their families. That being said, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. So do I hear a second?
Second.
Motioned by Councilman Burns, seconded by